Good morning. First of all, thank you for having me. It's definitely an honor to be able to share with you this morning. David asked me to talk about genius today. And at first, I was sort of like, wow, genius is such sort of a lofty term. It's almost unapproachable. But the more I started to think about it, the more I started to study it, it really started to make me just reflect on genius is really a reflection of our own achievement or sort of our will to want to achieve more. It kind of represents our quest to achieve our potential. And this is the Latin root of genius, which is gignere. It means to beget. Simply put, it's the attendant spirit present from one's birth. It's innate ability or inclination. So really, genius is within all of us. It's an innate gift. I think in our creative journey, it's really all about unleashing our own genius, as well as those people around us, even if it's just a little bit. And when I talk about sort of journeys in terms of reaching your creative potential, I always think about my childhood. Aw. So when I was little, I used to hate parent-teacher conferences because the same thing would happen every single time. The first part would be actually kind of fantastic. Teacher would say, your son shows promise. And that feels good. Actually, let's try it this morning. Turn to the person sitting next to you and say, you show a lot of promise. All right? It kind of feels good, gets the juices going, especially in the morning. But it's the second part of the conversation that was the kicker, right? Your son shows promise. However, his behavior is disruptive, unruly, distracting, and so forth, right? But let's take a step back from that commentary, true or not. I actually think it's untrue, but let's think about the context of what's going on here. Check out this photograph, and somebody tell me what's interesting about it.
You're the only one smiling.
Yeah? Smiling, the context of the people around me, perhaps. Huh? Yeah, right? So just so happens that I grew up in rural Japan. And let's just say that I stood out. So take a look at the little girl behind me. There's this sort of stunned look that's in all the children's faces around me in every single sort of photo album across my childhood, right? You'll see it in every photo. So I was forced to confront exclusion at a very young age. So it's difficult to deliver on that great promise that those teachers, those instructors were talking about, because everything that I did sort of in that context was inherently disruptive. Just imagine being a kid and being surrounded by audiences of other kids that are just perpetually stunned that you even exist. That's the look some of the people on my team give me sometimes, actually, right now, to this day. So at a young age, I had this dilemma. I wasn't like any of the other kids. Everything I did became sort of a spectacle or distraction. And my teachers thought that I was willfully disrupting their class. Luckily, I had some parents that were able to help me. They taught me that, everyone is special, everyone's unique. It just so happens in this particular situation and in this context, what made me unique was on the outside. My skin color, texture of my hair, my height even at that time. I was kind of towering over the other kids. And my dad taught me that, basically it's like being unique is like having a special telescope, is what he used to say. And that telescope allows you to see the world in a unique way. And the trick is to use that telescope to see what's special in other people as well. And so realizing that I had that telescope was, and still is, a gift. And it helped me to overcome, confront that exclusion at the time. And it's actually sort of driven my whole creative career up until this point. And if you fast forward 30 years or so, it's led me to Microsoft, where I lead design teams in Microsoft's design studios. And that's where we're trying to fulfill the potential of this promise, which is to empower every person and every organization on the planet to achieve more, right? It's the every person on the planet part that's a big deal. It's daunting, it's a big idea, because there are 7.4 billion people on Earth. 7.4 billion potential geniuses. And in terms of technology, there's one technology that sort of is poised to be able to affect each one of those 7.4 billion people, each one of us. As John Hennessy says, AI is one of the most profound undertakings of science, and it will affect every aspect of human life. The reason it will affect every aspect of human life is that the whole purpose of it, the goal, is to make machines solve problems that were formerly reserved for human beings, to extend our capabilities as people. So learning, reasoning, language, perception. To some people, that's terrifying. Raise your hand if that's a little scary. Yeah. To some people, it's incredible. But it kind of doesn't matter either way, because it's really set to happen. Because of this intersection of these three things, this inflection point that's happened. You have capability and computation in terms of memory beyond anything we've ever had. You have these vast amounts of data because of our digital economy and the devices we use every day, we're using right now. And sort of web and reasoning algorithms and logic has just grown in terms of prowess. Let's take speech, for example. So the error rate in conversational speech recognition has achieved human parity. And for the first time ever, recently it's allowed sort of real-time recognition, translation, and communication, kind of making what was impossible possible now, and actually starting to be almost mainstream. So a lot of you probably have made voice assistants at home, definitely in your pocket right now. And actually, here's an example of what's now possible and sort of its effect on people as well.
Do you like living in Mexico City?
¿Te gusta vivir en la Ciudad de México?
Aquí está muy lindo.
Here is very nice.
What do you do for fun?
¿Qué haces para divertirte?
Voy a las playas de México.
I'm going to the beaches of Mexico.
I like to swim.
Me gusta nadar.
A mí también.
Me too.
Where in the world do you wish to travel?
¿A dónde en el mundo te gustaría viajar?
A Rusia.
To Russia.
¿Y tú?
And you?
Everywhere.
Sería increíble algún día verte en México.
It would be amazing to see you someday in Mexico.
I would really like to visit you sometime.
Me gustaría mucho visitarte algún día.
A mí también.
Me too.
So I think that's amazing. Not only the technology is incredible, but its effect on people, I think to me, is what puts it into the level of genius in terms of it's exceptional. But let's take a look at it again, though. So natural language AI has reached human parity. But what does that mean? It's meeting parity with which humans? All humans? How does that play out, and how is it expressed in terms of culture? So the underrepresented groups in data sets that speech recognition uses tend to mirror the same groups that are usually marginalized in society. A typical database of human voices, for example, like rural, non-white, non-native English speakers. And the more you fall into any one of those categories, the worse that speech recognition machine learning is going to be for you. So say, for instance, you have a Southern accent. You're less likely to be understood.
I can teach you how to talk Southern. So here we go. 4, I think, maybe 5, I don't remember what I counted, steps to being Southern. Step number 1, words that should generally be 1 syllable are probably 2. So words like it and is and 1 syllable, not if you're talking in the South, it's 2. All right, so there you go. Step number 1, make your syllables, make words with 1 syllable, 2 syllables. Not all the words, because then it's just a little overkill. So be choosy, pick and choose which words you use and which words you don't, and just go with it. Just see what happens. It's gonna be fun. The second thing that you need to remember if you're gonna be talking Southern is that we do not pronounce the G's at the end of words, okay? So any word that typically is spelt with an ing, we're just gonna say in. And gone is just a different case altogether. It's just gone. I'm gonna be doing this, I'm gonna be doing that. We done did this, we're fixing to do that. Fixing is a good word. If you need to talk about how you're about to do something, you're fixing, get ready to do it.
Right? So this, in most cases, these types of accents are going to get the same response from machines that I got as a child in Japan. All right? It's sort of like, say what? And is that okay? As technology shifts to being able to respond to our vocal cords, what happens to that huge swath of people that are just misunderstood? In some cases, the actual functional challenge of speech recognition can also be conflated with the social challenge. So it doesn't understand me can start to be woven into they don't understand me.
Trying to be successful in this world, you feel as though you have to be able to speak on their terms and behave on their terms. So it's twofold. It's this need to fit in, and there's also pressure put on from the other side that if you don't speak and appear in ways that are similar to us, then you probably are not that good. If you speak in that other, you slang words and you speak in African American, then you maybe not that smart, maybe not as educated. So you're forced to assimilate.
Two guys walk up together and they might dap each other off and say, "What's up, son?" But that mean, homeboy, "What's up, brother?" You know, you might be my ride or die, you know, my homie, my ace, you know, my broski, you know, we say stuff like that and they'll be like, "Okay, why you can't just say friend? Hi, friend," you know?
All right. So does anyone here know what sort of a telephone voice is? Yeah. It's this phenomenon of normalizing your voice to make it devoid of any sort of individualized, exact personality, culture, flavor, texture, patina. And we typically use it when we're on the telephone with someone that we don't know. It just kind of starts to happen. This is also called accent leveling or dialect leveling. And in effect, people are using their telephone voices more often because of the difficulty of speech recognition. And accent leveling is driven by sort of this terrible cycle of, if machines aren't good at understanding me, I'm less likely to talk to the machines. Meaning that the systems that train those machines and allow them to learn are getting less data and they're collecting less information about my particular demographic, which leads to reinforced bias and which leads to more misunderstanding. It also creates sort of what could become sort of a speech divide. Obviously, where some people, speech recognition works really well, and others, it works not at all. And it could put people at a disadvantage, especially when, it's estimated that 24.5 million voice-driven devices will be shipped by the end of this year. And ComScore says that by, 2020, 50% of our searches will be voice-based. So this means a lot. So we talked about sort of the voice of AI. What about the face of AI? Do you think we should also witness the same type of unconscious bias in facial recognition?
We're using the face tracking software, so it's supposed to follow me as I move. I'm black. I think my blackness is interfering with the computer's ability to follow me. As you can see, I do this, no following. Not really following me. I back up, I get really, really close to try to let the camera recognize me, not happening. Now, my white coworker, Wanda, is about to slide in the frame. You will immediately see what I'm talking about. Wanda, if you would, please.
Sure.
Now, as you can see, the camera is panning to show Wanda's face. It's following her around. But as soon as my blackness enters the frame, which I will sneak into the frame. I'm sneaking in, I'm in there.
That's it.
And there we go, it stopped. My hands are here. Wanda, please get back in the frame. Get back in. As soon as white Wanda appears, the camera moves. Black Desi gets in there. Oh, nope. No face recognition anymore, buddy.
So that video actually was recorded in 2009. What about 2016? Do you think there's been much improvement?
Hi, camera. I've got a face. Can you see my face? No glasses face? You can see her face. What about my face? Well, I've got a mask. Can you see my face?
Yeah. So that's amazing. And so that's Joy, and she has a great TED Talk. You should check it out, as well as a whole website on bias and algorithms. So this is a problem. If you think about those fairly kind of straightforward cases, in relation to basically every aspect that AI is going to penetrate, from municipal systems, governmental systems, commercial systems, from healthcare to criminal justice to science, transportation. Everything is if it's not already is going to be sort of pervaded by artificial intelligence. And the list kind of keeps going on. So you could say that we have sort of an ethical imperative to kind of harness AI to empower people, regardless of what your company's sort of motto is. Because there's 7.4 billion potential geniuses out there. And like we said before, AI is a pretty good force to enable more capability for people. It also comes just down to what we design is a product of how we design. It's a simple statement. Our greatest asset when we design is human diversity. And just like my childhood in Japan, we should all use our magic telescopes, not only to understand how each of us is an individual and unique, but also focus on what's sort of universally important to all of us. That way we can increase access, reduce friction, create a more emotional connection in literally whatever you're designing. I love this quote from Susan Goldsman. Susan was an instructor at Berkeley, and she created inclusive spaces. And she said, inclusive design doesn't mean that you're designing one thing for all people. You're designing a diversity of things so everyone finds a way to participate. And this is the point of inclusive design. We have a practice at Microsoft, and it's a methodology born out of digital environments. It draws on the full range of human diversity. It's all about learning from people and celebrating the diverse range of perspectives that we all have. And we have 3 principles that guide our practice at Microsoft in terms of inclusive design. One is to recognize exclusion. Another one is to learn and design from diversity. And the other is to solve for one and extend to many. Real quickly, we just kind of go through them real quick. So people experience exclusion whenever they mismatch their environment. Right, so I was experiencing that as a child. It's just a mismatch. And that mismatch can be sort of physical in terms of abilities or disabilities. It could be cognitive in terms of sort of the way you learn. It could be social as well. So socially created identities such as gender, race, so forth. And as designers, it's our responsibility to understand how these mismatches are created consciously and unconsciously, because exclusion is designed, and it will happen. It's up to us as designers to identify that. And by learning from diversity, it creates more empathy with whatever your customer base is, right? And there's no reason to preach to the choir about empathy here. I think everyone here understands the value of that, but I think it's good to kind of step back and just understand and reflect on how great it is to sit in front of someone that is sort of completely different from you in terms of, it could be physical, social, cognitive, or whatever. And just the more you understand their uniqueness in terms of their ability or lack thereof, their motivations and so forth, the more you understand sort of what's universal. And you can connect with them. We each have our sort of unique ranges of abilities and perspectives and ways of learning, and that's what sort of makes inclusive design work. And the last one is sort of solving for one and extending to many. And this one is very sort of nuanced. It's kind of counterintuitive. But if you design on a sort of a persona spectrum, and design perhaps for someone with one arm and there's about 26,000 people with one arm in the US at any given time right now, then that sort of starts to solve for a temporary disability in terms of an arm injury. At any given time, there's 13 million people with arm injury, all right? And then, in terms of situational, there's 8 million people with an infant in their hand probably at any given time. So you add that up, and you've really solved for a great number of people just by focusing on someone that may probably be excluded. And it opens up so many pathways for innovation. So to bring these principles to life, especially sort of in an engineering environment, we create sort of these films, kind of across our teams, exploring the lives of some remarkable people that have been able to adapt to their situations. Let me introduce you to one, just a quick film. This is Antoine Hunter.
Inclusive, a Microsoft design toolkit. Antoine Hunter, deaf advocate, dance teacher, choreographer. I am a Nia Opes e Obidi Hene, father and dance advocate healer.
I got one time I had a really wonderful job offer, and I had to go to rehearsal practice. The only issue was the door.
Antoine, a tall, lean man with a beard, approaches an office building door and pushes numbers on an intercom keypad. In an interview, he signs.
I don't know what they're saying. I can't hear them.
Antoine presses his hand over the intercom speaker.
So I talked about the problem. They wouldn't hire me because it felt like there was too much energy just to have someone to let me in. Oh, that was big function. That was a cool job I wanted. Wow. And that's the bell sometimes.
Using a smartphone, Antoine and a friend sign to each other.
I feel like as a kid, we accept each other so easy, and that we are taught not to accept each other. We were taught that we're so different, like in a bad way, That we're taught that being deaf is a problem. It's not a problem. It's a different culture.
Antoine returns to his high school.
At Skyline High School, Miss Chang, my dance teacher, she said, everyone needs to create a piece, a group dance. I'm outcast. No one really want to work with me. I'll do a solo. Okay, do a solo. So I was trying to come up with an idea. I did a solo choreography with Whitney Houston, I Will Always Love You. I was dancing, I was nervous, dancing, and then, in the middle of that song, that's the instrumental break. And I didn't have to worry about the words, and it was just moving, and something electric just came to my body, and it was moving, the pain, the suffering, the getting through the things that I was trying to make it from day to day. And then the music finished, it was like, and people stopped to look at me, and then it was like, oh yeah, it was so cool. And then my teacher was like, what do you think of that dance? What did you feel? And people were saying, oh, I felt like it was cold. I felt like it was trapped. She was suffering, and it was like, they were saying all the words that I was thinking and feeling. Yeah, that's exactly what I felt. That was communication. I fell in love right there.
Antoine applauds by lifting both hands and shaking them.
With music, I use a lot of bars that move for volume.
On stage with musicians, Antoine strikes a graceful pose.
I just want to see it.
He touches the instruments.
I see Mark Shelby, he's like...
He mimes playing a cello.
And then I see the piano guy going...
He sways.
And my body records it. I memorize it really well.
Antoine starts to move.
I just started putting it all together, creating my own instrument so I can dance with everyone.
Shirtless, Antoine shows his muscular arms and torso as he reaches, dances, turns, and kicks in rhythm.
Even though I really want to know fuck that music they do. I'm fine, I'm satisfied because I made mine. I have my voice, I have my music, and I'm with them.
So I love Antoine's hunger for exploration. I think, human adaptation is a form of genius. I think you saw Antoine sort of reach his potential. And like we said, I think that is as close as you can get to sort of the root word of genius, which is sort of what the innate ability that you've been beget. And when people have experiences that don't serve them well, they adapt. Another thing you can do is just learn from how people adapt to situations like that in your own design practice. It sparks new connections. So recognizing AI and bias in AI. To kind of wrap up, the team is starting to understand and create a corpus of information around AI and bias. And we're sort of basing it on 5 things. Data set bias, association bias, goals bias, confirmation bias, and interaction bias. There's a URL, and we'll be adding more information to this as we go along. It's very nascent, but we're starting to sort of recognize AI bias. And AI isn't just about technology. If there's anything about this, it's about people, it's about culture, it's about community, and it's about potential. It's about fueling the creativity in each one of us, right? Especially those of us that are a little unique and a little out of place, right? Which is kind of all of us, right? Thank you.
Thanks, Tim. So we've got some time for questions here. And for those of you guys who are here for the first time, this is our mic ball. So if you have a question, you can ask it into the ball. And when you're done, you can throw the ball.
I'm
Onward.
trying to know how you ended up in rural Japan as a kid.
Oh, yeah. So my father was in the military. He's a Marine. And yeah, he was stationed there in Iwakuni and Okinawa.
Where do you see the future of AI going? I know you talked a lot about the different industries that it's going to touch. Oftentimes, I've been doing a lot of reading lately, and they talk about the power dynamic between the algorithm and the data set. Do you see that as a potential problem to prevent the empowering of AI for the masses and having it making sure that it doesn't just end up in the hands of a few key players?
Yeah, I mean, I think the machine learning and being able to start to solve some of the problems that humans once were had privy to solely, I think is where, in terms of perception, language, sort of reasoning, I think that's where it has the most impact, positively and negatively, right? So there's another, you can throw out many statistics, but 85% of workplaces in the next sort of 10 years may be using AI in terms of review cycles, hiring, firing, promoting, and so forth, right? So that's like, what data is being fed to it and how is it making decisions? It could extend and make something more efficient, or it could be extremely damaging to populations. I think you have to look at the people that are designing for it, and their goals, their motivations, and I think diversity in terms of the people that are engineering and designing goes sort of a long way as well, and starts to kind of course correct itself.
Thank you.
So there's an existing toolkit that we use in, say, web design to make websites accessible, and there are standards that kind of govern how that's used and how browsers interpret that. Do you have any insight as to kind of what are some emerging standards, and whether that's UX or technology based that we might expect in the near future?
Well, the thing about AI is I think we're defining them as we go. And then, I mentioned inclusive design, and I think it's worth mentioning that, accessibility in terms of compliance is one thing. So we create something, and often it's sort of a reaction to some sort of stimulus, like the accessibility team, or maybe you're getting sued, and you have to get compliant, right? And so that's more of a checkbox. I think with inclusive design, you're using people's abilities, disabilities, the range of human diversity to actually influence innovation. Like what you're actually making could be better, because from the beginning, you're focusing on underrepresented populations. And that makes it better for everyone. And that's sort of a nuance. But I think there's an accessibility track, and then there's sort of invention as well. I mean, AI is being invented.
Glad I caught that. Do you feel that AI bias is more of a hardware constraint or lapse in effective engineering?
Hardware versus, did you say engineering? Or?
Yeah. So is it cameras and stuff, their technical limitations, or is it people not coding them appropriately?
Well, if you have the same types of people from the same universities that work at the same company, kind of believe in the same thing, you're going to get sort of a certain output. And that would go across the whole ecosystem of hardware, software, services, and so forth, because it's just not taking into account other things. That's one potential. And so in that sense, because there hasn't been any testing on a specific group of people, then you're not creating the hardware to compensate for that. And sort of test your hypothesis. So you sort of have a false positive, and that's sort of the point around human parity, right? So what does human parity mean for who? And then someone's making those choices. There's a lot of people making those choices, and I think it goes across hardware and software.
Thank you.
Hey. Hello. Okay.
Hi.
So my question is, going back to AI, and when I think of AI, I kind of think of scientists studying maybe a specific gene or trying to find a cure for something, and how they're willing to collaborate maybe with someone in the opposite part of the world to try and figure out a solution for this thing. In terms of AI, and I know it's a really kind of vague, broad term and a lot to discover and understand, do you find that there are a lot of big players in this space that are communicating with each other and trying to help each other figure something out, or they're kind of siloing themselves and trying to be the first?
No, I think there is a definite effort to join forces. So Microsoft, Facebook, Amazon, I want to say Apple sort of have a coalition in sort of a brain trust to address some of these issues, to make AI sort of better technology, in terms of technology, in terms of sort of just regulations and so forth. So I think that is one great group that's working kind of towards that. I actually have a picture of them in sort of the appendix. But if you look at that group, you should check them out. It is sort of the diversity might be lacking there. So, so I think it's great intentions and it's a good step forward, but I think you just have to get more people into the mix.
So one part of AI is also potential job displacement, and I assume that the job displacement will also not be smooth or applied to everyone equally. And I was wondering if you thought about how design could help that.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think, if you look at LinkedIn or, Glassdoor was mentioned earlier, these companies are definitely investing in trying to design solutions for people because, it's a design problem to solve. If a group of people don't have a job and you want to supply them with information or an actual job, then how do you do that? And AI is a great way to do that. So I think it's key for that industry. But again, it's how that is represented. And then how you test it as well to make sure that some of those sort of 5 principles in terms of recognizing bias aren't triggered.
Really enjoy the design principles you present. It's hard to get somebody to bring that out of the lab for the rest of us to see. Given that you're working so hard to perceive your bias, I'm curious as to what, as a product, Microsoft intends to do if the FCC's current treatment of the pipeline itself, of net neutrality, goes in the direction that it seems to be going, an inherent pay-for bias. How will AI deal with the pipeline being biased?
I'm sorry, you broke up a little bit there.
How will this product that you're creating deal with net neutrality and the potential for bias built into the delivery pipeline?
Well, I mean, that's a large question. I don't know if I can answer that. That's a tough question in terms of the governmental agencies. I think it's just exposure. I mean, I think there's going to be some people excluded. And I think it's just up to sort of us as the public and obviously companies and governmental agencies too, to start to recognize that exclusion and then act on it. But I'm not sure you're going to be able to prevent it just from happening at all until the machines just take over all logic. Yeah.
Is it an issue at Microsoft in general, or are you not comfortable really saying?
Net neutrality?
Yeah.
I'm not in that space, so yeah, I couldn't really answer your question too well.
What's the ball? I can't throw.
I'm curious when you're talking about the how and the testing of what role you've seen communities play across the design process and maybe throughout companies. Because a week or two ago, there was this work being done by Desmond Patton, and he's working with communities to design a solution for de-escalation using social media as design data. And I'm wondering, when we're solving for AI and all of these missing voices, I guess, and identities in the process of, when you're having engineering build that, is there a way to get the community in there, and have you seen that rising over your career? Does that make sense?
Say it one more time.
To simplify, how do you see communities impacting the design process for reducing bias and then designing an AI that actually reaches everybody?
I mean, I think communities, it's great because a lot of these libraries and a lot of this tech in terms of APIs are just publicly available, right? And so like getting a hold of that stuff and just kind of playing around with it, obviously there's a barrier there just in terms of understanding it. But I think that is one huge portion. It's sort of what Joy has started to do in terms of, she's at MIT, so she's got the ability to be able to do that. But still, there's so many libraries available that the community can just start to play with and understand and put it in different contexts. A lot of times the AI research is driven by business needs, right? By corporations. So they may not be addressing some sort of innovative context or situation that the community could address.
Awesome, thanks.
We just recently moved here from China, where we raised our daughter, who was fluent in Mandarin. That's her first language. And so she would speak Mandarin to Chinese people, and then people would say to her, "Oh, well, where are you from?" And she said, "Well, I'm Chinese." And they looked at her and said, "No, you're not Chinese." And she said, "But I'm Chinese." And she couldn't understand because she didn't see any visual difference, but they looked at her and thought she was a foreigner. But I guess my question is, so how does AI account for, and you being from Japan, you understand that, and we spent a lot of time in Japan. Japanese want to be Japanese. Chinese want to be Chinese. They don't want foreign influences into their culture. So is that anything that you guys consider when you deal with AI?
Yes, I mean, like localization, just as the same as you do with any sort of global product, you have to take into account language and custom and culture. I think that's when you get into problems, when you force a common AI that hasn't taken into account a certain culture. And, you know, it's basically disabling people as opposed to enabling them. But yeah, I think you can, it's all about testing with real people and understanding those people's goals and motivations within certain contexts. And the context could be sort of regional, or the context could be, you know, sort of contextual. So if you're in a car, you have a notification on your device, you're essentially blind at that point, because you shouldn't look at the device. So if you're working on AI solutions for cars, why not bring blind people in and test them? That's sort of like solving for one and extending to many. They're going to be subject matter experts on not being able to identify something visually. So I'm trying to answer your question, but it's just all about context and real people. Yes, please do that.
Bring it back in. Ready?
Hey, Tim, awesome talk today. Thank you so much.
Thanks.
I'm really curious, what inspires you to keep stepping into your own genius to serve people through powerful design?
Say it one more time. I'm sorry. It's hard to hear.
What inspires you to keep stepping into your own genius to serve people through powerful design?
Oh, that's a really good question. I think for me, it's always been, so I like to do a lot of qualitative research. And I love to see sort of the smile on people's faces when you've enabled them to do something they weren't able to do. And it's sort of this amazing revelation where just like, oh, wow, I wasn't able to do that, and now I am. And so it's sort of this amazing thing that goes on with people. So that's usually what drives it, and that's also when I know, and sort of hopefully the team knows, that like we've reached something that's impactful or compelling.
Thanks.
I'm not a designer, I'm not an engineer. They let me in. But I want to know how someone like me can be an advocate for inclusive design and accessibility and all of that, what you're talking about, like in my own team today.
Yeah.
What can I do leaving this today?
Yeah, so that's a great question. I'm glad you're excited about it. Go grab the Inclusive Design Kit from the site right here. And there's a ton of exercises you can use with your team in terms of like pre-sprint, while you're sprinting. I think you can apply them to basically sort of any endeavor. And then it also sort of, you can, the leader for that can be from any discipline. So it's inclusive design, but design is basically problem solving. So anybody can kind of lead that.
Yeah, again, great talk. I love the personal story at the beginning to really lay out what you were going to talk through. And then things like the Skype video and the dancer, those are really powerful stories, to illustrate these concepts that can sometimes be a little bit tough to to put into words. My question for you is, you talked a second ago about this consortium of tech companies and that not being the most diverse group of people. You talked about engineers. All of us, we have our own biases that we put into our work, and that's unique to us as humans. The question is, how is Microsoft bringing previously underserved communities into the engineering world? Because ultimately, this stuff, like the facial recognition thing, that changes when the groups of people who are building these products look more like the groups of people who are using them. What is Microsoft doing to encourage that from the ground up?
Yeah, that's great. I mean, having inclusive design as a practice in general, I think, is a huge step forward, right? It's a whole team and sort of a confederation of teams throughout sort of the entire company. It's a way of working. It's a strategic approach to solving problems sort of across hardware, software, HR, and so forth. And so sort of that's one way. Just in terms of education and awareness is, first, and then just in terms of like making it actionable for engineers and designers to use it while they're creating tools. I think, one example would be sort of the latest edition of OneNote and their sort of concentration on children with like cognitive disabilities and with, like, such as autism and dyslexia, and how using those children as an example, you've kind of created a whole sort of feature set that you can go check out as well. So, the process is starting to turn into actual launched products. There's Xbox for everyone, which is another sort of inclusive effort. There's Windows for everyone, which is another one as well. All of that is outlined on that site. And then in terms of just HR and hiring, there's a big focus on diversity and inclusion. One more question.
Yep, here, you ready?
Hi, I'm Wanjiko. Thank you so much for the talk.
Thanks.
So I am coming from an international development strategy consulting background, looking to move into design. And what you're talking about seems like a classic problem we've encountered, which is a lack of data in the parts of the world that we work in. And therefore, a lot of what we do is extremely biased and difficult to carry out. So I wonder, are there any efforts within design and within tech currently to collect data that is less biased, data that is more diverse, if the underlying problem is that current data just does not include a wide diversity of people, of languages, and of cultures? And if that exists, if it doesn't exist, it should, and the big six should figure out how to make it happen. And how can people like us help to add to it? Is it open source, or can it be, should it be? Thanks.
Yeah, so answer to that question is yes. I think a lot of the large companies, like Amazon, Facebook, Microsoft, and so forth, are doing just that. And those algorithms and the way that these machines are learning are getting a lot better. But that takes up a lot of resources, right? And so the public APIs and some of the governmental data sets aren't sort of at the same pace. And that's, I think, where it really affects most of the population. And it's going to affect the people that are probably marginalized the most at that level. In terms of like solutions to help out with that, there's folks like Joy that are just working with those algorithms to make them better. I think that's more of like sort of a grassroots effort, because a lot of times we have the access to some of the same ones.
Thanks.
Thanks.